Part 3 of Phaedo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Bob Neufeld. Phaedo by Plato. Translated by Benjamin Jowett. Part 3. Suppose we consider the question whether the souls of men after death are or are not in the world below. There comes into my mind an ancient doctrine which affirms that they go from hence into the other world, and returning hither are again from the dead. Now if it be true that the living come from the dead, then our souls must exist in the other world, for if not, how could they have been born again? And this would be conclusive, if there were any real evidence that the living are only born from the dead. But if this is not so, then other arguments will have to be adduced. Very true. Then let us consider the whole question, not in relation to man only, but in relation to animals generally, and to plants, and to everything of which there is generation, and the proof will be easier. Are not all things which have opposites generated out of their opposites? I mean such things as good and evil, just and unjust, and there are innumerable other opposites which are generated out of opposites. And I want to show that in all opposites there is of necessity a similar alternation. I mean to say, for example, that anything which becomes greater must have become greater after being less. True, and that which becomes less must have been once greater, and then have become less. Yes, and the weaker is generated from the stronger, and the swifter from the slower. Very true, and the worse is from the better, and the more just is from the more unjust. Of course. And is this true of all opposites? And are we convinced that all of them are generated out of the opposites? Yes. And in this universal opposition of all things, are there not also two intermediate processes which are ever going on, from one to the other opposite, and back again? Where there is a greater and a less, there is also an immediate process for increase and diminution, and that which grows is said to wax, and that which decays to wane? Yes, he said. And there are many other processes, such as division and composition, cooling and heating, which equally involve a passage into and out of one another, and this necessarily holds of all opposites, even though not always expressed in words. They are really generated out of one another, and there is a passing or process from one to the other of them. Very true. Well, and is there not an opposite of life, as sleep is the opposite of waking? True. And what is it? Death, he answered. And these, if they are opposites, are generated the one from the other, and have their two intermediate processes also? Of course. Now, said Socrates, I will analyze one of the two pairs of opposites which I have mentioned to you, and also its intermediate processes, and you shall analyze the other to me. One of them I term sleep, the other waking. The state of sleep is opposed to the state of waking, and out of sleeping waking is generated, and out of waking sleeping, and the process of generation is in the one case falling asleep, and in the other waking up. Do you agree? I entirely agree. Then suppose that you analyze life and death to me in the same manner. Is not death opposed to life? Yes. Are they generated one from the other? Yes. And what is generated from the living? The dead. And what from the dead? I can only say in answer, the living. Then the living, whether things or persons, Cebes, are generated from the dead? That is clear. Then the inference is that our souls exist in the world below. That is true. And one of the two processes or generations is visible. For surely the act of dying is visible. Surely, he said. What then is to be the result? Shall we exclude the opposite process? And shall we suppose nature to walk on one leg only? Must we not rather assign to death some corresponding process of generation? Certainly. And what is that process? Return to life. And return to life, if there be such a thing, is the birth of the dead into the world of the living? Quite true. Then here is a new way by which we arrive at the conclusion that the living come from the dead, just as the dead come from the living. And this, if true, affords a most certain proof that the souls of the dead exist in some place out of which they come again. Yes, Socrates, he said, the conclusion seems to flow necessarily out of our previous admissions, and that these admissions were not unfair, Cebes, he said, may be shown, I think, as follows. If generation were in a straight line only, and there were no compensation or circle in nature, no turn or return of elements into their opposites, then you know that all things would at last have the same form and pass into the same state, and there would be no more generation of them. What do you mean? A simple thing enough, which I will illustrate by the case of sleep. You know that if there were no alternation of sleeping and waking, the tale of the sleeping Endymion would in the end have no meaning, because all other things would be sleep too, and he would not be distinguishable from the rest. Or if there were composition only, and no division of substances, then the chaos of Anaxagoras would come again. And in like manner, my dear Cebes, if all things which partook of life were to die, and if they were dead, remained in the form of death, and did not come to life again, all would at last die. Nothing would be alive. What other result could there be? For if the living spring from any other things, and they too die, must not all things at last be swallowed up in death? There is no escape, Socrates, said Cebes, and to me your argument seems to be absolutely true. Yes, he said, Cebes, it is, and must be so in my opinion, and we have not been deluded in making these admissions. But I am confident that there truly is such a thing as living again, and that the living spring from the dead, and that the souls of the dead are in existence, and that the good souls have a better portion than the evil. Cebes added, your favourite doctrine, Socrates, that knowledge is simply recollection, if true, also necessarily implies a previous time in which we have learned that which we now recollect. But this would be impossible unless our soul had been in some place before existing in the form of man. Here then is another proof of the soul's immortality. But tell me, Cebes, said Simmias, interposing, what arguments are urged in favour of this doctrine of recollection? I am not very sure at the moment that I remember them. One excellent proof, said Cebes, is afforded by questions. If you put a question to a person in a right way, he will give a true answer of himself. But how could he do this, unless there were knowledge and right reason already in him? And this is most clearly shown when he is taken to a diagram, or to anything of that sort. But if, said Socrates, you are still incredulous, Simmias, I would ask you whether you may not agree with me when you look at the matter in another way. I mean, if you are still incredulous as to whether knowledge is recollection. Incredulous I am not, said Simmias, but I want to have this doctrine of recollection brought to my own recollection, and from what Cebes has said, I am beginning to recollect and be convinced, but I should still like to hear what you are going to say. This is what I would say, he replied. We should agree, if I am not mistaken, that what a man recollects he must have known at some previous time. Very true. And what is the nature of this knowledge or recollection? I mean to ask, whether a person who, having seen or heard or in any way perceived of anything, knows not only that, but has a conception of something else which is the subject, not of the same, but of some other kind of knowledge, may not be fairly said to recollect that of which he has the conception. What do you mean? I mean what I may illustrate by the following instance. the knowledge of a liar is not the same as the knowledge of a man. True. And yet what is the feeling of lovers when they recognize a lyre, or a garment, or anything else which the beloved has been in the habit of using? Do not they, from knowing the lyre, form in the mind's eye an image of the youth to whom the lyre belongs, and this is recollection? In like manner, any one who sees Simmias may remember Sabis, and there are endless examples of the same thing. Endless indeed. And recollection is most commonly a process of recovering that which has been already forgotten through time and inattention. Very true. Well, and may you not also, from seeing the picture of a horse or a lyre, remember a man, and from the picture of Simmias you may be led to remember Sabis? True. Or you may also be led to the recollection of Simmias himself. Quite so. And in all these cases the recollection may be derived from things either like or unlike? It may be. And when the recollection is derived from like things, then another consideration is sure to arise, which is, whether the likeness in any degree falls short or not of that which is recollected. Very true. And shall we proceed a step further, and affirm that there is such a thing as equality, not of one piece of wood or stone with another, but that, over and above this, there is absolute equality? Shall we say so? Say so, yes, replied Simmias, and swear to it with all the confidence in life. And do we know the nature of this absolute essence? To be sure. And whence did we obtain our knowledge? Did we not see equalities of material things, such as pieces of wood and stones, and gather from them the idea of an equality which is different from them? For you will acknowledge that there is a difference. Or look at the matter in another way. Do not the same pieces of wood or stone appear at one time equal, and at another time unequal? Well, that is certain. But are real equals never unequal? Or is the idea of equality the same as of inequality? Impossible, Socrates. Then these so-called equals are not the same with the idea of equality? I should say clearly not, Socrates. And yet, from these equals, although differing from the idea of equality, you conceived and attained that idea. Very true, he said. Which might be like, or might be unlike them. Yes, but that makes no difference. Whenever from seeing one thing you conceived another, whether like or unlike, there must surely have been an act of recollection. Very true. But what would you say of equal portions of wood and stone, or other material equals? And what is the impression produced by them? Are they equals in the same sense in which absolute equality is equal, or do they fall short of this perfect equality in a measure? Yes, he said, in a very great measure too. Must we not allow that when I or any one, looking at any object, observes that the thing which he sees aims at being some other thing, but falls short of, and cannot be the other thing, but is inferior, he who makes this observation must have had a previous knowledge of that to which the other, although similar, was inferior? Certainly. And has not this been our own case in the matter of equals and of absolute equality? Precisely. Then we must have known equality previously to the time when we first saw the material equals, and reflected that all these apparent equals strive to attain absolute equality, but fall short of it. Very true. And we recognize also that this absolute equality has only been known, and can only be known, through the medium of sight or touch, or of some other of the senses, which are all alike in this respect. Yes, Socrates, as far as the argument is concerned, one of them is the same as the other. From the senses, then, is derived the knowledge that all sensible things aim at an absolute equality of which they fall short? Yes. Then, before we begin to see or hear or perceive in any way, we must have had a knowledge of absolute equality, or we would not have referred to that standard the equals which are derived from the senses, for to that they all aspire, and of that they fall short. No other inference can be drawn from the previous statements. And did we not see and hear and have the use of our other senses as soon as we were born? Certainly. Then we must have acquired the knowledge of equality at some previous time. Yes, that is to say, before we were born, I suppose. True. And if we acquired this knowledge before we were born, and were born having the use of it, then we also knew before we were born and at the instant of birth not only the equal or the greater or the less, but all other ideas. For we are not speaking only of equality, but of beauty, goodness, justice, holiness, and of all which we stamp with the name of essence in the dialectical process, both when we ask and when we answer questions. Of all this we may certainly affirm that we acquired the knowledge before birth. We may. But if, after having acquired, we have not forgotten what in each case we acquired, then we must always have come into life having knowledge, and shall always continue to know as long as life lasts, for knowing is the acquiring and retaining knowledge, and not forgetting. Is not forgetting, Simmias, just the losing of knowledge? Quite true, Socrates. But if the knowledge which we acquired before birth was lost by us at birth, and if afterwards by the use of the senses we recovered what we previously knew, will not the process which we call learning be a recovering of the knowledge which is natural to us, and may not this be rightly termed recollection? Very true. So much is clear, that when we perceive something, either by the help of sight or hearing or some other sense, from that perception we are able to obtain a notion of some other thing like or unlike which is associated with it, but has been forgotten. Whence, as I was saying, one of two alternatives follows. Either we had this knowledge at birth, and continued to know through life, or after birth those who are said to learn only remember, and learning is simply recollection. Yes, that is quite true, Socrates. And which alternative, Simmias, do you prefer? Had we the knowledge at our birth, or did we recollect the things which we knew previously to our birth? I cannot decide at the moment. At any rate, you can decide whether he who has knowledge will or will not be able to render an account of his knowledge. What do you say? Certainly he will. But do you think that every man is able to give an account of these very matters about which we are speaking? Would that they could, Socrates, but I rather fear that tomorrow at this time there will no longer be any one alive who is able to give an account of them such as ought to be given. Then you are not of opinion, Simmias, that all men know these things? Certainly not. They are in process of recollecting that which they learned before? Certainly. But when did our souls acquire this knowledge? Not since we were born as men? Certainly not, and therefore previously. Yes. Then, Simmias, our souls must also have existed without bodies before they were in the form of man, and must have had intelligence. Unless indeed you suppose, Socrates, that these notions are given us at the very moment of birth, for this is the only time which remains. Yes, my friend, but if so, when do we lose them? For they are not in us when we are born, that is admitted. Do we lose them at the moment of receiving them, or if not, at what other time? No, Socrates, I perceive that I was unconsciously talking nonsense. Then may we not say, Simmias, that if, as we are always repeating, there is an absolute beauty and goodness, and an absolute essence of all things, and if to this which is now discovered to have existed in our former state, we refer all sensations, and with this compare them, finding these ideas to be pre-existent and our inborn possession, then our souls must have had a prior existence, but if not, there would be no force in the argument. There is the same proof that these ideas must have existed before we were born, as that our souls existed before we were born, and if not the ideas, then not the souls. Yes, Socrates, I am convinced that there is precisely the same necessity for the one as for the other, and the argument retreats successfully to the position that the existence of the soul before birth cannot be separated from the existence of the essence of which you speak, for there is nothing which to my mind is so patent as that beauty, goodness, and the other notions of which you were just now speaking, have a most real and absolute existence, and I am satisfied with the proof. Well, but is Cebes equally satisfied? For I must convince him too. I think, said Simmias, that Cebes is satisfied. Although he is the most incredulous of mortals, yet I believe that he is sufficiently convinced of the existence of the soul before birth. But that after death the soul will continue to exist is not yet proven even to my own satisfaction. I cannot get rid of the feeling of the many to which Cebes was referring, the feeling that when the man dies the soul will be dispersed, and that this may be the extinction of her. For admitting that she may have been born elsewhere, and framed out of other elements, and was in existence before entering the human body, why, after having entered in and gone out again, may she not herself be destroyed and come to an end? Very true, Simmias, said Cebes. About half of what was required has been proven, to wit, that our souls existed before we were born. That the soul will exist after death as well as before birth is the other half of which the proof is still wanting, and has to be supplied. When that is given, the demonstration will be complete. But that proof, Simmias and Cebes, has been already given, said Socrates, if you put the two arguments together. I mean this and the former one, in which we admitted that everything living is born of the dead. For if the soul exists before birth, and in coming to life and being born can be born only from death and dying, must she not after death continue to exist, since she has to be born again? Surely the proof which you desire has been already furnished. Still, I suspect that you and Simmias would be glad to probe the argument further. Like children, you are haunted with a fear that when the soul leaves the body, the wind may really blow her away and scatter her, especially if a man should happen to die in a great storm, and not when the sky is calm. Cebes answered with a smile, Then, Socrates, you must argue us out of our fears, and yet, strictly speaking, they are not our fears, but there is a child within us to whom death is a sort of hobgoblin. Him too we must persuade not to be afraid when he is alone in the dark. Socrates said, Let the voice of the charmer be applied daily until you have charmed away the fear. And where shall we find a good charmer of our fears, Socrates, when you are gone? Hellas, he replied, is a large place, Cebes, and has many good men, and there are barbarous races not a few. Seek for him among them all, far and wide, sparing neither pains nor money, for there is no better way of spending your money. And you must seek among yourselves too, for you will not find others better able to make the search. The search, replied Cebes, shall certainly be made. And now, if you please, let us return to the point of the argument at which we digressed. By all means, replied Socrates. What else should I please? Very good. End of Part 3.